Hello guys, and welcome to another video. Now, I've played Path of Exile 2's Dawn of the Hunt update quite a lot over the weekend. I've progressed through the campaign and into maps. I'm in early maps now and I'm playing a spear build, so I feel like I have a decent grasp on the patch overall, minus some of the significant endgame content updates which I haven't interacted with just yet. But I wanted to make a video with my feedback for this patch, now that I've had some time to collect my thoughts. So let's begin with the campaign. Now, back at the early access launch of Path of Exile 2, the campaign was praised by many, myself included, as being the best part of the game. It really did feel like Acts 1 through 3 were balanced very well, and the pacing was really good. You felt like your character was getting stronger as you progressed, and even though there were some rough edges, overall it was a satisfying experience. And then into the cruel half of the campaign, the pacing started to run away, and by the time we reached maps, it was just out of control and felt like a completely different game at that point. However, I want to focus on the campaign right now, because in patch 0.2, I believe GGG's balance changes have largely ruined what was a really good experience going through Acts 1, 2 and 3 back at launch 4 months ago. The issue here is that these balance changes were supposed to address the state of endgame, which was a good idea because endgame balance was completely skewed. But the changes have somehow massively impacted the campaign experience. You no longer feel that satisfying progression of your character getting stronger because it feels like you're always behind the curve. Monsters are so tanky, they take far too long to kill, and I know GGG are currently addressing this with some emergency hotfixes to monster life, but I question how these changes managed to even get into the game in the state they are. This patch overall feels like it could have been worked on for another 4 months and still not be ready for release. And I know some people may say that this is an early access game. What do you expect? Well, if it's an early access game, why is GGG treating it as a full release product? Why won't they make the necessary changes to the game as and when they're needed? Looking back at my own experience through the campaign, now knowing that the main skill that I was playing was actually bugged and was dealing far too much damage than it should have been, I realise now that the only reason I was able to breeze past the majority of the campaign is because of that bug. Without that, it would have been the slog that I experienced in Acts 1 and 2, all the way through. And I think really that's one of my major takeaways of this patch. The campaign just feels like a chore, whereas I thoroughly enjoyed it 4 months back. So much so that I ran 7 or 8 different characters all the way through the full campaign back at original launch, just so that I didn't have to play the endgame because the endgame wasn't good. Whereas now, there's a huge problem. You see, this Dawn of the Hunt patch was massively focused on Path of Exile 2's endgame. GGG have added all of this new endgame content and made a lot of changes to the endgame experience, but all of it will be for naught if players don't actually reach the endgame and get to play it. And that's what I've been seeing. Lots of people either quitting because they're not enjoying the game in the campaign, or people on the outside looking in and deciding not to play because the general sentiment is that this is not a good time to play Path of Exile 2. Now, I want to discuss what I believe is one of the biggest problems with Path of Exile 2 right now, and this is something that affects the entire game, not just the campaign, but also into the endgame, and that's the monsters. The monsters in Path of Exile 2 are completely imbalanced. As I mentioned before, they have too much life, and that's not the biggest issue that I see with them either. The biggest problem is how fast they are relative to how fast your character can be. It's so often the case that you're just getting run down by a rare monster that's just auto-attacking you to death. You can't possibly outpace the monster, and you're just in a state of permanently dodge rolling away, but of course you can't deal damage while doing this, so you're not winning that battle. There's not enough access to player movement or attack and cast speed to counter the obscene speed of some of the monsters. And at the same time, there's no really good universal defensive options either, so it's not like you can just tank them. Now, I don't really want to talk about or compare PoE 2 to PoE 1 in this review, but I just want to mention here that the only reason ridiculously fast monsters work in PoE 1 is that you have many options available as a player to deal with them. You can build a lot of defense to tank them, or you can build a lot of speed to outpace them, or you can build a lot of damage and kill them before they kill you. But in PoE 2, none of these things are an option. It feels like these much slower, methodical character builds, and then it just has PoE 1 monsters that run rampant all over the game. Seriously, the monsters are out of control and they need a major balance pass across the board. If GGG want to realise their vision of this slower paced game, They need to address the monsters. We need monsters that are dangerous, but ones that you can actually play around. Now, another big issue with the game right now for me is the loot. There's just not enough loot available to aid your character in progression. Necessary currency drops such as Artificer's Orbs, Exalts, and Regals, the currency you're expected to utilise to improve your gear as you progress, well, there's not enough of it dropping. It's very similar to what I discussed before, where you don't have that satisfying experience of getting stronger because your gear is in a constant state of requiring upgrades. Upgrades that you simply cannot get unless you get really lucky with some random ground drops. There's no direction early on to get good gear, no easy solutions to solve gearing problems. If you have bad gear and you're out of currency, you're out of luck. You'll have to retread completed areas to farm loot. And this is where I still believe that the game would benefit massively from a basic crafting bench to streamline gear progression and offset unlucky streaks in loot. And for me, this is another example of Path of Exile 2 doing change for change's sake when it comes to runes. Runes do not and cannot replace a crafting bench. They're just infinitely worse as a solution to aid in early gearing. Now, it's possible that loot drop rates were tampered with for this patch, but I expect that the actual reason why this feels worse is because player power is down massively across the board. And now you need much better gear to get even remotely close to where you were before. The expected gear level is higher as a result, while drops are seemingly unchanged, so you feel so much weaker overall. Now, speaking of feeling weak, let's talk about the spear in early progression. I can't speak on the Huntress start location on the tree because I played a Mercenary, but Mercenary does have a lot of projectile damage scaling immediately from the start, so I used spear projectile skills from the very beginning, and overall they felt very weak aside from a few exceptions such as Twister, which was bugged and is now nerfed. Now, I do think that this is a lot less of a spear thing and more of an overall shift in player power across the board. It just so happens that the spear was introduced in this patch and a lot of people naturally gravitated towards using it right away, and this is the experience they had. However, with that said, I think it would have been better for overall reception of the Dawn of the Hunt patch to have the spear come in strong and feel better early on, even if it meant needing to nerf it down a bit later on if it was too out of line against other options. Instead, the spear felt weaker than other options, which isn't ideal considering that most people just want to play the new thing whenever a new release is happening. Okay, the last thing I want to discuss in this review is the size of the zones. Now, I know this is something that isn't new to this patch. The zones were already huge with many terrible layouts in the early access launch 4 months ago, but it's important to recognise why this issue in particular is exacerbated by this patch. It's pretty simple really. Players are weaker, monsters are stronger, and it takes longer to kill monsters and you need to play much slower as a result, and therefore zones take way longer to clear, and this only adds to the problems caused by horrible layouts that constantly run into dead ends. It just makes a lot of the zones feel extremely frustrating to traverse. Now, in GGG's planned updates they discuss this issue and talks about adding more checkpoints. But the way I see it, checkpoints are just a band-aid fix to a fundamental problem in PoE 2. The layouts need serious work, especially if they want to keep the game as slow as it is right now. So, to summarise, balance changes should not have changed the campaign, which was my favourite part of the game 4 months ago, and now it feels like a slog. Monsters are simply ridiculous. They're too fast, and players need options available to them if they're not going to be slowed down. Loot needs reviewing, especially progression currency in the early campaign, and I'd like to see a basic crafting bench added to the game. Spear skills could do with some adjustments in the very early levels as they feel too weak as they are right now. And lastly, if the game is going to remain at the current pace, the size and shapes of zone layouts needs to be reviewed to prevent frustration when traversing through areas in the campaign and in maps. Overall, with my current experience of patch 0.2, which doesn't include much of the endgame content that was added, I feel that this update was an overall net negative to Path of Exile 2. Thanks for watching this video, and as always, stay tuned and stay safe.